The cornerstone of psychiatry today is the concept that a chemical imbalance underlies all so-called mental illness. Now, while this is made popular by heavy marketing and public relations, it is simply more psychiatric wishful thinking. As with all of psychiatry's disease models today, it has been thoroughly discredited by researchers. But even so, Klein, one of the leading government experts on mind control, stated exactly what psychiatry intended to do and what it has strived to do for more than 3 decades. Number 1, make drug use for controlling daily life common and morally acceptable. And 2, develop more drugs to control even more aspects of people's lives. Broad-based social control and behavior modification were justified under the banner of science. Now, believe it or not, psychiatry and psychology refer to behavioral control through chemicals as normalizing the individual. In the 1950s and 60s, psychiatrists attempted to normalize children and adults with such drugs as LSD and amphetamines. And today, many more drugs are given to children and young adults with devastating consequences. Anne Blake Tracy, author of Prozac, Panacea or Pandora, explains.
PCP was put out as a drug that was considered to be very safe and effective, and yet find a police officer anywhere today that's going to believe that. And you won't. If we've made this kind of mistake in the past, I believe firmly that we're just as capable of making that bad a mistake now, or worse. And yet, people are continuing to take these medications, and they're putting their children on them. 17-year-old boy jumped off a freeway overpass, and another one hung himself in his room on Prozac, 14-year-old. Another one on Paxil shot himself after 4 days on the drug. And there's so many. The list is so long. You had a 14-year-old girl who drank Drano in a suicide attempt after 1 month on Paxil. I have heard that they get matching federal funds for every child that is diagnosed as learning disabled. There's other reports around the country where they have documented through testing that the IQ has dropped drastically for children on these medications.
In establishing its methods in the public school system, a major problem psychiatry faced was how to diagnose an illness that required expensive, ongoing drug treatment, and when no disease existed and no physical problem could be proven or found. Or more to the point, how could parents and teachers be convinced that children should be administered powerful drugs simply to control behavior? And as we can see, the answer was to establish in the minds of Americans the chemical imbalance theory of behavioral disorders, and that drugs were necessary to control that behavior. In the 1970s, amphetamines and other drugs began to pour into America's schools. Now fast forward to the first decade of the 21st century, and we discover that 9 million American school children have been labeled with a psychiatric illness. The vast majority are on psychiatric drugs, and crime and violence has risen, while scholastic achievement scores have plunged out the bottom. While the statistics are horrifying, the true cost in human terms, the virtual annihilation of hope and the future for the nation's children, is beyond calculation. Just as a person who turns to drugs to solve a problem sooner or later finds the solution has become the problem, so it is with psychiatry and psychology in the schools. Instead of solving a problem, they became the source of new ones. Dr. Fred Bauman, nationally recognized adult and pediatric neurologist, explains.
They don't get worse because of the, quote, prognosis of their diseases, because these aren't diseases. They're all fraudulent. They get worse, and they go from bad to worse because of how they are being assaulted and lied to in the name of psychiatric treatment. And they get worse with each passing month and each passing year. Eric Harris in Littleton, Colorado, who led the massacre in Columbine High School. He was on Luvox. The youngster in Conyers, Georgia, T.J. Solomon, was on Ritalin. We know that Kip Kinkle in Springfield, Oregon, who killed his parents and shot 22 in the school, killed 2 others, he was on Ritalin and Prozac. He had ADD, dyslexia, and major depressive disorders. Not one of them a real disease. The children are blamed by labeling them with these pseudoscientific psychiatric labels and then by drugging them.
In 1971, psychiatrist Paul Wender stated that stimulants in general and methylphenidate, otherwise known as Ritalin in particular, could increase the susceptibility to conditioning in humans. School children could now be conditioned as B.F. Skinner had envisioned, but only after their brain chemistry had been balanced. 30-plus years later, the next generation has reaped the disastrous and tragic effects of psychiatry's effort to balance the mythical chemical imbalance in the brain. We'll be right back after this public service announcement.
Has your child or someone you know been falsely labeled with a mental disorder and given dangerous, mind-altering drugs? If your child has been labeled with ADD, attention deficit disorder, or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and given psychiatric drugs, there is something you should know. According to leading pediatric medical experts, these psychiatric labels have no scientific basis whatsoever. If you or your child have been abused by psychiatric treatment, call CCHR for help at 1-800-782-2878. Don't wait until it's too late. Call now, 1-800-782-2878. A public service announcement by the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, an international watchdog group. Call 1-800-782-2878 or visit our website, cchr.org.
Most children and most parents don't know that the DEA, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, has warned that the drug methylphenidate, better known as Ritalin, which addicts have termed poor man's coke, but which is widely prescribed to school children to control behavior, can cause psychotic episodes, heart attacks, strokes, violence, psychological dependence, and sudden death. Children and most parents don't know that when children are psychiatrically labeled, it can disqualify them for a career in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, or the Coast Guard. In testimony before Congress, Terrence Woodworth, Deputy Director of the DEA's Office of Diversion Control, noted that the United States produces and consumes over 85% of the world's production of Ritalin and other drugs such as Cylert and Adderall used to chemically restrain children. He said, "The DEA has observed a dramatic increase in the production and use of both methylphenidate, or Ritalin, and amphetamine." He revealed that methylphenidate production surged from over 1,700 kilograms in 1990 to almost 15,000 kilograms in the year 2000, an 8.5-fold increase, while amphetamine production rose even more sharply, from 400 kilograms in 1990 to over 9,000 in the year 2000, an increase of more than 21 times. And while consumption of methylphenidate and amphetamine has exploded in schools, law enforcement authorities report that increasing numbers of students in middle school, high school, and college use methylphenidate and other stimulants just to get high.